Once touted as an impressive franchise that dominated college parties and family get-togethers, to one that modern teenagers probably don't even know about, Guitar Hero's fall from grace was massive. How did a franchise with so much potential, 20+ games, tens of millions of copies sold, and a massive cult-like following vanish into complete obscurity within the span of a decade? Well, to tell this story, we need to start at the very beginning with a game that would change the industry forever. The origins of Guitar Hero began with the formation of two scrappy companies, Harmonix and RedOctane. Harmonix was established on May 10, 1995 by Alex Rogopoulos and Aran Igozi, two new graduates from MIT. The company was created with the goal of making non-musicians feel like musicians, although they had yet to figure out how to achieve this. Their first project was titled The Axe, and as Alex Rogopoulos put it wasn't a game, it was a joystick music improv system. And by this description alone, you can understand why it was a cataclysmic failure, selling only about 300 copies. Fast forward to 1999, and the duo had noticed the success of rhythm video games such as Beatmania, Parappa the Rappa, and Dance Dance Revolution. As they faced the reality of their latest business model failing, they decided to shift gears to developing video games. Their first video game, Frequency, released on November 20th, 2001 for the PlayStation 2. It was well received critically, but it sold poorly. Their subsequent titles, Amplitude on March 25th, 2003, and Karaoke Revolution on November 4th, 2003, met similar fates, critically successful, but not quite reaching mass appeal. The issue that Harmonix had with Frequency and their other early titles was that people just didn't care about the ideas these games brought to the table. So this meant that the company could make great games that people loved, but couldn't get people to see and try these games to begin with. They had a marketing problem, and it stemmed from the fact that they didn't have a dedicated hardware controller. You just played their games with a normal PlayStation controller, and that wasn't very fun. Around the same time, RedOctane was established by two brothers, Kai Huang and Charles Huang, on September 10, 1999. It began as a digital games rental service, predating the likes of GameFly and Netflix. The premise was that you loan them games for some cash, then somebody gets to play it while you rent out a title yourself. Shortly after opening the service up, the dot-com bubble burst, kneecapping the entire operation. The brothers scrambled to find a new niche, and as they searched, they noticed the success of rhythm games in Japan. What was unique about games like Dance Dance Revolution, for example, was that they required custom controllers, or peripherals, to be played. Neither the games themselves or the peripherals were sold anywhere in the US at the time, which positioned their rental service as one of the few ways to play them. Of course, you wouldn't have a controller to play them with, so they decided to create and sell their own dance pads to go along with their game rentals. It wasn't much, but it brought in enough cash to help the company weather the storm and build a reputation for themselves. Through this, they also proved to Konami that there was a market for Dance Dance Revolution on consoles in the West, helping to bring the title overseas. Around this time, Roxor Games had just released a similar arcade title to DDR called In the Groove. As RedOctane was looking to expand their operations beyond making hardware, they decided to enter the world of publishing with In the Groove's console release. Still, RedOctane saw that even though Dance Dance Revolution had found some success in the West, it wasn't to the explosive degree that Japan saw. RedOctane wanted to capture that popularity in the US, but the writing was on the wall. Dance games just weren't very popular in Western markets. They had to think outside of the box and find a way to make rhythm games interesting for American audiences, so designing hardware centered around rock and roll instruments like guitars and drums were their best bet. They got a lot of inspiration from a Japanese arcade cabinet series called Guitar Freaks, and began their foray into making an exciting new rhythm game controller that felt like a real guitar. They had great ideas, but they needed someone to develop the game that these controllers worked with. Because remember, RedOctane was not a game developer, they just made the hardware. And this sounded like a simple task, but most game development companies dismissed RedOctane by simply claiming that music games don't sell. But according to Corey Fong, the senior brand manager at RedOctane, they just didn't know any better. So very few companies gave them the time of day. Except, of course, Harmonix. While their music games didn't sell, their work did catch the attention of RedOctane. So, Harmonix needed a controller, and RedOctane needed a game, and the perfect partnership was formed. RedOctane agreed to create the peripherals for this new game titled Guitar Hero and fund its development, but Harmonix had to finish it in 9 months and for less than $2 million. Would they be able to deliver? As we all know, short development cycles always come at the cost of something. After all, they say you can only pick two, quick, cheap, or good. But somehow, Harmonix had to do all three. Fortunately, they had the foresight when negotiating contracts with past publishers to allow the company to retain all rights to the code used in their other games. This meant that they weren't working off of a blank slate. They could use the systems from their past rhythm games to quickly craft a working build. And their past titles, Amplitude and Karaoke Revolution, were basically the perfect combination to create something like Guitar Hero. And the amount of time that they saved by having this code on hand would be extremely beneficial to everything else the team had going on. Saving time is one of the most important things when it comes to enabling you to do what you truly want to do. Which is why, when I get tired of cooking, I use the sponsor of today's video, Factor 75. Factor 75 brings delicious, ready-to-eat meals right to your door, and every meal is fresh, never frozen, crafted by chefs, dietitian approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And the meals are really good too. I've actually been a Factor subscriber for about a year now. Basically, you get to pick from 35 different menu options every week, including low-calorie meals, high-protein meals, keto meals, and vegan or vegetarian meals, and they are really good too. Factor takes the stress out of planning your weekly meals, so you can skip the chaos of the grocery store and all of that midweek cooking fatigue. Help to support the channel, keep these videos possible, and eat better by checking out Factor. Get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders by using my link. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen with your phone to switch today to save time and money and eat healthier. Thank you to Factor for helping me to keep my food costs down and sponsoring this video, and let's now talk about the cost involving Guitar Hero. In order to keep licensing costs down, Harmonix only purchased the rights to do covers of songs and had Wave Group try to recreate them as closely as possible for the game. This was a great solution for the early days of the franchise as it allowed them to save money, but licensing would become a bigger issue later down the line. Throughout Guitar Hero 1's development, the game was an absolute hit with the staff. Not only did they enjoy developing it, they enjoyed playing it. Harmonix was largely composed of musicians, which allowed them to create a game that more accurately represented rock culture, and it was awesome. They even added their own band's songs as bonus tracks. Things were looking great, but only time would tell if the customers felt the same way. Prior to release, Guitar Hero's big break was when RedOctane's senior brand manager, again Corey Fong, contacted IGN and asked them to check out the game. The team at IGN loved it, and people flocked in droves to try it out at that year's E3. Guitar Hero released on November 8, 2005, and the reception was nothing short of massive. It made $45 million in the first 2 months. The demand for the game was so high, in fact, that RedOctane couldn't keep up. Stores would request as many as 80,000 guitar units, and the best the company could do was 2,500 at a time. It was obvious that the two studios had a smash hit on their hands, so naturally a sequel was the next step. Harmonix and RedOctane knew that Guitar Hero 2 had to be bigger and better in every way imaginable. It needed to include new modes, characters, guitars, venues, and of course, new songs. Which worked out great for them because with the success of the first game, they had far more power when negotiating licensing deals. This allowed for some of the most requested bands to be featured in the track list. It was even possible to license a few master recordings, something that was completely impossible for their first game. In the end, there were 64 songs at launch, 17 more than its predecessor, and each of them came with a bass and rhythm track that could be played separately with a different note chart. This feature essentially doubled the catalog and allowed players to perform as a band in multiplayer instead of just facing off. The game even included a practice mode where players could review specific sections of songs as much as they wanted. It had just about everything players could have wanted in a sequel. So when Guitar Hero 2 released on November 7, 2006, it was no surprise it was yet another resounding success. It grossed over $200 million in only 2 months, more than 4 times what the first game made, in the same amount of time. It wasn't too long before bigger publishers wanted to cut and made offers to purchase RedOctane and Harmonix. Activision bought RedOctane and the Guitar Hero brand in May of 2006 for a whopping $100 million, while MTV Games, owned by Viacom, bought Harmonix for $175 million later that year. But there was a catch. For whatever reason, likely bad blood between Activision and Viacom higher-ups, RedOctane was forbidden from working with Harmonix again on another Guitar Hero title. As a result, their last title together was Guitar Hero Rocks the 80s, the follow-up to Guitar Hero 2, as they were still contractually obligated to see a spin-off until completion. But after this, Activision would be in charge of all upcoming Guitar Hero games. And while this seemed good at first, it would quickly take a turn for the worst. As a result, Guitar Hero 3 Legends of Rock was the first title in the series developed by Neversoft instead of Harmonix. While they were well equipped for the job based off of their experience with the Tony Hawk series, they lacked the same musical experience that Harmonix had. This led to many small, personal touches being lost in subsequent titles. Examples include note charts poorly matching the music and a focus on providing a challenging experience instead of one that's fun. Neversoft also decided to play extremely safe for their first title in the series, barely innovating anything with the sequel. Apart from new wireless controllers, online multiplayer, and the game's increased difficulty, there really wasn't much to set it apart from past titles. Except, of course, the soundtrack. The song count was a whopping 73 tracks, over half of them were master recordings instead of covers, and it included many iconic bands. Even better, Guns N' Roses' legendary guitarist Slash was featured in the story with a song he created exclusively for the game. The track selections were by far the best of any game yet, as many critics would go on to confirm. However, there was one other element that elevated the game's popularity to unfathomable heights, and it came in the form of a new console breaking into the market. The Nintendo Wii was a cultural touchstone when it first came out on November 19, 2006. Not only did it end up becoming one of the best-selling consoles in gaming history, it managed to appeal to new audiences. It was a massive hit with casual players, becoming a console that was synonymous with families and get-togethers, while the Xbox 360 and PS3 became the consoles for hardcore gamers. It had a very particular brand that was a match made in heaven for the likes of Guitar Hero. So when Guitar Hero 3 released on October 28, 2007, copies were flying off the shelves. It was Activision's most successful launch at the time, making $100 million in the first week alone. And even though the game was released on 6 different platforms, the Wii version made up over half of the game's sales. The figures don't even begin to scratch the surface of how it impacted social gatherings either. The game seemed to be everywhere, and everyone who saw it wanted to give it a shot. When they did, they were hooked. It didn't matter that the title didn't innovate in a lot of areas, because to almost everyone playing the game, the franchise was completely new to them. And frankly, it was just a really good game, even if it had some blemishes here and there. But despite that, over the next few years, the Guitar Hero franchise would decline almost as quickly as it started. In typical AAA game publisher fashion, Activision decided that they needed to bring more Guitar Hero titles to the market, with sequels, ports, expansions, and spin-offs being released annually. While things weren't as charming as they used to be, there was still some hope. Activision's access to resources drastically reduced the shortages of guitar controllers, titles could be ported to more consoles simultaneously, and most of these new games did bring some improvements to the series. To many, this shift wasn't even noticeable. Out of the millions playing these games, there weren't exactly a lot of people who were familiar with the underground culture they were originally based on. All they knew was that the series allowed them to connect with friends and family in completely new ways, especially after the enormous success of the Wii, which already managed to bridge generations unlike any console ever had before. The sales figures alone speaks to the impact that this franchise had on pop culture, being the first to have an individual video game generate over $1 billion in revenue. It was a monstrous success, but things would soon go downhill relatively quickly. While all of this was going on, Harmonix didn't want to step away from the genre after Guitar Hero 2. They immediately got to work making a title with the same formula, but with new instruments added into the fray. This resulted in Rock Band as a competitor franchise, sprouting from the foundation of Guitar Hero 2 in 2007. The company's drastic innovations ended up becoming an astronomical critical and financial success, bringing in over $600 million despite the additional peripherals bringing the price tag up to $200. Rock Band wasn't made with the intention of killing Guitar Hero either. In fact, the individuals at RedOctane and Harmonix never actually held any grudges. But the rhythm game arms race had officially heated up. Because of Rock Band's innovation and success, only a year later, Guitar Hero 4 World Tour adopted the drum and microphone instruments. While this was largely a good thing, it meant none of the songs from past games could be imported, including their DLC. This also marked the first title in the series to be able to feature every single song as the original master recording instead of covers. Like Guitar Hero 3, the game was criticized for poor note charting, and even with the new improvements, people considered this game to be the worst Guitar Hero game yet. It had a lot of flaws, but most importantly, the game poorly communicated when a bandmate was failing a song, and there wasn't a way to save them from failing, unlike in Rock Band. This would lead to frustrating situations where the entire team loses the game because one player was struggling. Guitar Hero 4 tried to innovate with the introduction of an in-game music creator, but it was predictably quite limited. Overall, critics wrote it off as an inferior replica of Rock Band, which was problematic. The game was still a huge success in terms of sales, albeit a bit less than Rock Band 2, but the cracks in the series were definitely starting to show. The two franchises were largely able to coexist over the course of 2007 and 2008. In fact, they had almost a symbiotic relationship with how they could innovate upon each other and give back to the bands that they were licensing tracks from. Between 2005 and 2008, a total of 6 Guitar Hero titles were released, and with the success of Rock Band, the rhythm game market would soon be extremely oversaturated. To fight this oversaturation, Activision would do something that would begin the downward spiral that would eventually kill this beloved franchise. In 2009, 6 new Guitar Hero titles came out. Remember, there were 6 mainline titles released by the end of 2008, and by the end of 2009, that number had doubled. It was a mad dash to capitalize on market share and compete with Rock Band, and all intentionality was thrown out the window. One of these new games, Smash Hits, didn't even feature new songs. It was just a combination of the most beloved and played songs of the series. Critics called it the definition of milking a franchise. The excitement for each of these new Guitar Hero games began to fade, and people were quickly becoming overwhelmed with the number of titles on the market. This was indicated by Guitar Hero 5 barely selling 1 million copies by the end of the year, less than a third of the past entry in the series, despite actually being a pretty decent game. But to make matters worse, Rock Band released 3 titles in 2009, further compounding to the oversaturation of the genre. You couldn't go into any game store without being met with an onslaught of rhythm game titles, like it or not. And let us not forget the elephant in the room. The 2008 recession was still being felt heavily by many. Even if you were interested in all of these titles, there were very few people who could actually afford to buy all of these AAA rhythm games, plus the expensive peripherals that they called for. 3 of the Guitar Hero titles that were released in 2009 were minor expansions, coming with less songs and overall polish than mainline releases, but still being sold at a full $60 price point. The last of which, Guitar Hero Van Halen, was ripped to shreds by critics and fans. IGN's Eric Brudvig said, "No effort was put into making it good. It's a step backwards for the franchise and a totally unnecessary release," with other critics like the ones at GamePros tearing into it as well. Unsurprisingly, all 2009 Guitar Hero and Rock Band games performed worse than their publishers had expected. For context, the music genre produced $200 million in 2006, $1 billion in 2007, $1.6 billion in 2008, and now $900 million in 2009. Half the profits, with 4 times the titles of past years. It was clear the genre as a whole was on the decline. Going into 2010, Activision realized this and immediately started to cut back on the franchise. On February 11, 2010, news broke that Activision was shutting down RedOctane, one of the original creators, and moving staff responsible for developing Guitar Hero controllers directly into Activision. Even worse, Neversoft's Guitar Hero team was set to be dissolved after completing development on Guitar Hero 6. The future of the franchise seemed grim, even if Activision claimed that they were just putting Guitar Hero on hiatus. If these remaining titles didn't perform well, Activision was sure to pull the plug entirely. So when Guitar Hero Warriors of Rock came out on September 24, 2010 and received mediocre reviews, it was a death sentence for the series. The title failed to break even 1 million sales and reviews were at an all-time low, a stark contrast to the glory days of the series. The game was meant to be a return to the series' roots, but it had an incredibly weak setlist that could barely be considered rock. A number of songs didn't even feature guitars as the dominant instrument, a pretty big oversight for a game called Guitar Hero. All in all, the game felt aimless and underwhelming. The last DLC for it was released on April 12, 2011, barely 6 months after the game came out. And on March 31, 2014, all of the DLC for Guitar Hero Warriors of Rock were permanently removed from storefronts due to Activision no longer holding the licensing rights for many of the tracks. In fact, the track licensing was a consistent problem for the Guitar Hero franchise from the very beginning. In a sense, Guitar Hero relies on the works of other artists to exist. The issue with this is it costs money to license the work of artists for your product. The cost depends on many different factors and can be negotiated with the respective licensing companies, but there are a few points that make costs go up. What you need the song for, whether it's the master recording or not, and how famous the song is. Early on into the franchise, the developers circumvented this issue by creating covers of the songs instead of using the originals, but as the franchise grew, the setlist had to as well. Master recordings and famous songs became a must, and neither of those came cheap. The companies responsible for licensing the songs want to ensure it's profitable and that it won't reflect badly on the artist in any way. This issue would only get worse as DLC was released for later titles, because now they can't just ask for a one-time license. It has to be renewed every so often, and you also need the rights to distribute the song. It lit a fire under the entire franchise that compounded the need for Guitar Hero to always be successful to combat the rising licensing costs. With this in mind, it's more apparent why the poor reception to Warriors of Rock was such an issue to the company. Activision determined that Guitar Hero was no longer the flagship franchise that it used to be. And Neversoft, the Activision studio that developed all of the Guitar Hero games since Activision acquired the rights to the franchise, was in rough waters too. Between the declining Guitar Hero sales figures and the disinterest in the Tony Hawk franchise that put them on the radar, they were no longer profitable, and Activision deemed that it was time to consolidate them to mitigate losses. So Neversoft was shut down in 2014 and merged with another Activision studio, effectively pulling the plug on all future Guitar Hero projects. On the other side of the coin, while Warriors of Rock was a disappointing release, Rock Band 3, which came out around the same time, fared infinitely better with critics, receiving 3 perfect ratings in all and over a 90% on Metacritic. But even with the positive reception, the sales of this game were also only a modest success, reaching a mere 1.2 million units over the course of 5 years. The rhythm game market was officially oversaturated, and no matter what new gimmicks these franchises brought to the table, people just weren't going to be buying Guitar Hero and Rock Band games like they used to. Rock Band 3 did manage to maintain profitability due to the increased price points surrounding the peripherals and the constant barrage of DLC releases, at least for a little while longer. But the truth of the matter was this. Guitar Hero and Rock Band were in an arms race, flooding the market with expensive, somewhat repetitive rhythm games that required upwards of a few $100s worth of peripherals. There's only so much demand for music games, and when there are 20 plus games released in less than a decade, people are going to lose interest. So, while Guitar Hero's fate was sealed a bit sooner than Rock Band's, the failure of both franchises was inevitable. With Neversoft shut down, Guitar Hero fell off the radar after Warriors of Rock. But in a last-ditch effort, Activision released Guitar Hero Live in 2015, using another one of their subsidiaries called Freestyle Games, who worked on another series of rhythm games called DJ Hero in 2009. This new title was supposed to make Guitar Hero exciting again by switching to a 6-finger controller to more accurately represent real guitar strumming, instead of the 5-finger controller that was used from the very beginning. And while this sounded great in theory, fans hated it. Plus, because of this change, no songs from past games were backwards compatible, and you were also forced to buy an entirely new guitar controller, making the barrier to entry even higher than it should have been. The visuals were also completely changed, losing the character and flair that made the game feel fun and exciting, and the notes were also entirely redesigned to a weird 3-note system that made the whole thing feel bland, corporatized, and uninteresting. The game also only had 42 songs by default, and you had to play to earn tokens and hero cash to temporarily unlock the ability to play the good parts of the catalog. The whole system was terrible, and it was honestly a disgrace to longtime fans of the Guitar Hero series. So of course, the game flopped and caused half of the Freestyle Games staff to be laid off only 4 months after the game's initial release. And this failure marked the final straw for the future of the Guitar Hero franchise. And believe it or not, Rock Band never quite met the same fate. Instead of changing everything, Rock Band 4 largely stuck to the same formula, but for next-gen consoles, and saw a huge success, resulting in around $100 million in sales by early 2016. The game's launch catalog, thanks to allowing the importing of past songs and purchasing of previous DLCs, spanned over 1,500 songs. They operated on the philosophy that if you bought a Rock Band song, it should still be yours in Rock Band 4. In 2021, Epic Games purchased Harmonix and they worked on Fortnite Festival. Rock Band 4 would continue to be supported with new weekly DLC all the way up until January of 2024, and all the DLC from Rock Band 3 was also available to purchase, allowing players who also utilize the extensive free importing features to potentially amass a catalog of over 3,000 songs. We don't know what the future holds for Harmonix and future Rock Band titles, but we do know that Guitar Hero's fate is sealed, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm sure Activision will bring Guitar Hero back sometime over the next few years, continuing the same cycle of greedy AAA developers ruining franchises just to bring them back from the dead in the name of profit.